A mafia boss see his maid being humiliated on a blind date with only $5 and her life change forever. Today, I bring you a powerful and deeply loving story about two people from completely different worlds who find each other in the most unexpected way. Amara Rodriguez scrubbed the marble floors of the mansion on her hands and knees, her back aching from hours of work. The early morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air around her tired figure. At 25, she had already weathered more hardships than most people face in a lifetime. Her mother's medical bills had forced her to drop out of nursing school and take on 3 jobs, including this cleaning position at the estate of one of the city's most feared men. The mansion itself was a palace of contradictions, exquisite art and antiques displayed in rooms where bloody decisions were made. Amara kept her head down, becoming nearly invisible as she moved through the sprawling estate that housed the notorious Castillo family. Victor Castillo ruled his criminal empire with calculated precision, his reputation for both generosity and ruthlessness equally legendary in the city. At 38, he had risen from street enforcer to the head of the most powerful crime family through intelligence and unwavering determination. His days were filled with meetings where men spoke in hushed tones about territories and shipments, while his nights were spent at exclusive clubs surrounded by people who feared him more than they liked him. The isolation of power had become his constant companion. Victor barely noticed the household staff that maintained his luxurious lifestyle, seeing them as merely functional extensions of his home. He had learned early that attachment was a weakness his enemies could exploit, so he kept everyone at a safe, cold distance. What Victor didn't realize was how much Amara observed as she worked silently through the rooms of his home. She noticed how he stared at old family photos when alone, how his fingers lingered on piano keys but never played, how he sometimes spoke kindly to stray cats in the garden. The staff quarters were located in the east wing of the mansion, a modest contrast to the opulence of the main house. Amara shared a small but comfortable room with another maid, grateful for the stability of the job, despite its connection to criminality. Her few possessions were neatly arranged on her side of the room: worn paperbacks, a photo of her mother, and a nursing textbook she still studied at night. Dreams didn't die easily, even when reality made them seem impossible to achieve. Miles away from the mansion, in a small apartment she maintained in hopes of bringing her mother home from the care facility, Amara kept her true life. The modest space was filled with second-hand furniture and the smell of cinnamon and hope, a sanctuary untouched by the shadow of the Castillo Empire. Her friend Lucia had been pestering her for weeks about meeting this perfect guy she knew from her office. "You can't clean houses forever," she insisted during their weekly phone calls, her voice full of well-intentioned concern for Amara's solitary existence. After weeks of resistance, Amara finally agreed to the blind date, more to silence Lucia's persistent encouragement than from any real hope. "Just once," she had promised, "and then you'll stop trying to fix my love life for at least 3 months. The night before the date, as Amara polished silver in the Castillo dining room, she overheard Victor speaking harshly on the phone. "I don't care how it's handled. Just make the problem disappear," he said, his voice cold in a way that sent shivers down her spine. In that moment, their eyes met across the room, hers wide with fear, his narrowed with suspicion. Time suspended as something unidentifiable passed between them, a recognition neither was prepared to acknowledge before Victor turned away with a dismissive wave of his hand. The restaurant was far too expensive for Amara's budget, with crystal chandeliers and waiters in tailored suits. She wore her only nice dress, a simple black garment she saved for special occasions, feeling immediately out of place among the designer clothes and confident laughter. David Matthews arrived 20 minutes late, his expensive watch and perfectly styled hair immediately setting off warning bells in Amara's mind. His eyes surveyed her with poorly concealed disappointment before he plastered on a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "So, you're the cleaning lady Lucia won't stop talking about," he said, after ordering the most expensive wine on the menu without consulting her. His tone made the words sound like an accusation rather than a conversation starter. Unbeknownst to either of them, Victor Castillo was dining in the private section of the same restaurant, entertaining business associates behind the partial privacy of an elevated booth. His attention drifted from the conversation when he recognized Amara's profile across the room. The date deteriorated quickly, as David made a show of checking his phone every few minutes, his interest clearly waning before they'd even ordered appetizers. "I usually date women in finance or law," he mentioned casually. as if this explained his obvious disinterest. As the waiter arrived to take their order, David leaned back with a smirk that transformed his handsome features into something ugly. "I should mention that I only brought $5 for this date," he announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Lucia didn't tell me you were so ordinary," David continued, each word carefully chosen to wound. "I agreed to this as a favor to her, but let's not waste any more of each other's time pretending this could go anywhere." Amara sat frozen, humiliation burning through her as conversations at nearby tables quieted, curious eyes turning toward their table. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her napkin on the table, dignity fighting against the urge to flee. From his vantage point, Victor watched the scene unfold, his jaw tightening as he observed the cruel game being played at Amara's expense. He had witnessed countless brutal acts in his life, but something about this deliberate public humiliation of his quiet, hard-working maid ignited an unexpected fury within him. "Excuse me for a moment," Victor murmured to his associates, rising from the table with fluid grace that belied the anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. His security detail exchanged concerned glances, but remained seated at his subtle hand signal. Victor approached just as tears threatened to spill from Amara's eyes, her spine straight, despite the emotional blow. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, placing his hand on her shoulder with surprising gentleness, before turning his attention to David. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, as Victor's dark eyes assessed the man before him, his voice deadly quiet when he finally spoke. "You've made a significant error in judgment tonight, one that requires immediate correction before we discuss the consequences." Recognition dawned on David's face as he realized who stood before him, the color draining from his cheeks as Victor Castillo's reputation suddenly became very personal. "Mr. Castillo, I didn't mean any disrespect," he stammered, but Victor cut him off with a slight raise of his hand. "Ms. Rodriguez works for me, which means her treatment reflects directly on my household," Victor stated, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken threat as he placed several $100 bills on the table. "Consider your debt to this establishment, and to her paid in full." Amara found herself guided outside to a waiting black SUV, her mind struggling to process the sudden turn of events as Victor opened the door for her. "I can't leave with you," she whispered, years of caution fighting against the inexplicable trust she felt in that moment. "You can, and you will," Victor replied, his tone softened from the ice he had used with David. "Consider it a ride home from your employer, nothing more, unless you prefer to go back inside to your $5 date." The interior of the vehicle was luxurious leather that Amara had cleaned but never sat upon before. Victor maintained a respectful distance beside her, his presence simultaneously intimidating and reassuring as he instructed his driver to take them to her address. "How did you know where I was tonight?" Amara finally asked, breaking the heavy silence between them. Her voice was stronger than she expected, curiosity temporarily overshadowing the lingering embarrassment from the restaurant. Victor's expression remained carefully neutral as he stared straight ahead. "I notice more than people think," he answered simply, leaving unspoken the fact that he had recognized her immediately, despite having barely looked at her during her months of employment. The city lights created shifting patterns across his face as they drove, temporarily softening the hard edges of his features. "No one deserves to be treated as less than they are," he said quietly, surprising himself with the unexpected sentiment. When the car pulled up outside her modest apartment building, Amara hesitated with her hand on the door. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes directly for perhaps the first time. "But this doesn't change who you are or what you do." A ghost of a smile touched Victor's lips as he nodded once, acknowledging both her gratitude and her boundaries. "Get some rest, Ms. Rodriguez. I'll expect you at the usual time tomorrow," he replied, maintaining the employer-employee distance she had established. Amara lay awake that night, replaying the evening's events in her mind as rain pattered against her window. The humiliation of the date was overshadowed by the puzzling behavior of Victor Castillo, a man known for ordering executions, who had instead ordered justice on her behalf. Miles away, Victor stood at his bedroom window overlooking the city, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. Something unfamiliar stirred within him, not just protective anger, but recognition of a strength in Amara that reminded him of his own difficult past. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking about someone else's feelings, wondering if she was all right after the public embarrassment. Victor took a rare moment to question what his life had become, surrounded by wealth and power but devoid of genuine connection. The next morning arrived with awkward awareness as Amara moved through her cleaning routine, hyper-conscious of Victor's presence in his home office. She had arrived expecting things to return to their previous professional distance, yet something fundamental had shifted between them. Victor watched from his doorway as she dusted the library shelves, noticing for the first time how her eyes lingered on book titles, how she handled each volume with care rather than just removing dust. "Do you read much, Ms. Rodriguez?" he asked, surprising them both with the personal question. Amara nearly dropped the book in her hands, startled by his sudden appearance and unexpected interest. "Yes," she admitted cautiously. "I read whatever I can get my hands on." The conversation that followed was their first real exchange, tentative but genuine, a delicate bridge forming between their separate worlds. The days that followed brought subtle changes to the rhythm of the Castillo household. Victor began taking his morning coffee in the kitchen rather than his study, coincidentally when Amara prepared breakfast for the staff, their conversations growing longer with each passing day. During these quiet morning moments, Amara learned that Victor had grown up in poverty, fighting his way out of the slums through sheer determination. His eyes carried shadows when he spoke of his childhood, revealing wounds that wealth and power had failed to heal. "I wanted to be a concert pianist once," he admitted one rainy morning, surprising her with this glimpse of abandoned dreams. His fingers drummed a silent melody on the kitchen counter, muscle memory of a life unlived. Amara found herself sharing pieces of her own story in return: her mother's illness, her interrupted nursing education, her determination to eventually return to school. The vulnerability felt dangerous, yet somehow safer than pretending to be invisible in his presence. One evening, Victor returned home with unusual tension lining his face after a meeting with rival families. He found Amara organizing his medication in the bathroom cabinet, a task usually handled by his personal assistant, who was away on family leave. "You're still here," he observed, loosening his tie as he leaned against the doorframe. The surprise in his voice revealed how few people remained in his presence when not required, how accustomed he'd become to solitude even in a house full of staff. Amara noticed the slight tremor in his usually steady hands, the barely perceptible sign of pain he was masking. "Your shoulder is bothering you again," she stated, rather than asked, recalling the physical therapy appointments noted in the household schedule she maintained. Without waiting for permission, she guided him to sit on the edge of his bed, her nursing training taking over as she gently pressed her fingers against the knotted muscles. Victor's initial stiffness gradually yielded to her touch, a small sigh escaping him as pain eased for the first time in days. The intimacy of the moment hung between them, unacknowledged yet impossible to ignore, as her hands worked with professional precision, despite the personal charge in the air. "Why do you stay in this house, knowing what I am?" Victor asked, his voice barely audible. Amara's hands stilled for a moment before continuing their careful ministrations. "Everyone has different sides to them," she answered thoughtfully. "I've seen more than just the mafia boss these past weeks. Their proximity triggered something primal in Victor, a protective instinct he had thought long extinguished. Her nearness made him acutely aware of the blood on his hands, the danger his world posed to someone as genuinely good as she was. As moonlight filtered through the window, casting silver patterns across the floor, Amara completed her impromptu therapy session and stepped away, the professional boundary restored, but something unspoken lingered between them like electricity before a storm. Late that night, Victor found himself standing outside the door to the staff quarters, an envelope in hand containing nursing school applications and scholarship information. He hesitated, conflicted by the desire to give her a future and the selfish wish to keep her near. In the end, he slipped the envelope under her door and walked away, unseen by anyone but the shadows that had been his constant companions. His chest ached with unfamiliar emotion as he retreated to his empty suite, the vast rooms suddenly feeling cavernous in their isolation. The following morning, Amara discovered the envelope and its contents with disbelief, recognizing Victor's handwriting on the note that simply read, "Your dreams matter." Tears blurred her vision as she realized he had remembered every detail she had shared about her interrupted education. Word spread through the criminal underworld about Victor Castillo's unusual interest in his household staff. Whispers circulated at underground poker games, and in the back rooms of legitimate businesses, serving as fronts for illicit operations. Franco Navarro, head of the rival family that had been encroaching on Castillo territory, listened to these rumors with calculating interest. "Find out everything about this maid," he instructed his lieutenant, seeing potential leverage against a man previously thought untouchable. Meanwhile, Amara and Victor's connection deepened through small, everyday moments. Him asking her opinion on a book they'd both read, her leaving fresh coffee outside his office during late-night meetings. These gestures, insignificant to outsiders, became a private language between them. Victor found himself sharing meals with her in the kitchen during her breaks, the formality of boss and employee gradually dissolving into something neither dared name. He revealed parts of himself long hidden, his love of classical music, his secret donations to children's hospitals, his regrets. Each revelation was a brick removed from the wall he had built around himself, creating a dangerous opening in his carefully constructed defenses. Victor knew this vulnerability could destroy everything he had built, yet found himself powerless to stop its progression. Amara, too, recognized the peril of their growing closeness, the impossible future it promised. Her rational mind warned against developing feelings for a man whose business was built on violence and intimidation, yet her heart responded to the gentleness he showed only to her. One evening, Victor's security chief, Gabriel, entered his study with concern etched across his usually impassive features. "Navarro's men have been asking questions about one of your maids, boss," he reported, sliding surveillance photos across the mahogany desk. The images showed Amara leaving her apartment, shopping at the local market, visiting her mother at the care facility, ordinary moments made sinister by the knowledge she had been followed. Victor's blood ran cold as he realized his attention had painted a target on her back. That night, Victor increased security around both the mansion and Amara's apartment without her knowledge. He began distancing himself, returning to his study for morning coffee, keeping conversations brief and professional when they crossed paths in hallways. The sudden withdrawal confused and hurt Amara, who couldn't understand what had changed between them. The warmth that had begun to thaw the ice around Victor's heart seemed to refreeze overnight, leaving her adrift in uncertainty and unexpected loneliness. Unknown to her, Victor was fighting a war on multiple fronts, maintaining control of his territory against Navarro's increasing challenges, while protecting Amara from becoming collateral damage in a conflict she had no part in creating. The weight of these dual responsibilities kept him awake at night. His lieutenants noticed the change in their boss, the increased aggression in business dealings, the harsh punishments for even minor infractions, the return of the cold efficiency that had made the Castillo name feared throughout the city. Victor was reinforcing his reputation at the cost of his humanity. Yet even as he played the role of ruthless crime lord to the outside world, Victor found himself standing outside Amara's door late at night, listening for any sign of distress. These silent vigils became his penance for drawing her into his dangerous orbit. The annual charity gala hosted by the city's elite approached, an event where criminal enterprises laundered both money and reputations through generous donations. Attendance was mandatory for maintaining the facade of legitimate business that concealed Victor's true operations. As Victor reviewed the guest list in his study, a bold plan formed in his mind, one that might satisfy his desire to have Amara near him, while also sending a clear message to Navarro about her importance. With uncharacteristic uncertainty, he went in search of her among the mansion's many rooms. Victor found Amara organizing linens in the supply closet, the mundane task at odds with the gravity of what he was about to propose. "I need someone I trust at the charity gala tomorrow night," he said without preamble, his voice carefully neutral despite the rapid beating of his heart. Confusion crossed Amara's face as she processed his words, understanding slowly dawning that he was asking her to accompany him to the most prestigious social event of the season. "You have security for that," she replied carefully, searching his face for the real meaning behind this unexpected request. "Security watches for external threats," Victor explained, stepping closer until the scent of her shampoo mingled with his cologne in the small space. "I need someone watching for the dangers I can't see, someone whose judgment I trust implicitly." The gown arrived at Amara's apartment that evening, an emerald green creation of silk and delicate beading that shimmered like captured moonlight. The card accompanying it read simply, "Not a uniform, but armor for battle," in Victor's distinctive handwriting. Hours later, Amara stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing herself in the elegant reflection staring back. The dress fit perfectly, transforming her into someone who might believably belong on the arm of Victor Castillo, even as her trembling hands betrayed her nervousness. Victor's breath caught when she emerged from the elevator into the mansion's foyer where he waited. For a man accustomed to concealing his emotions, the naked admiration on his face was as shocking to his staff as it was to Amara herself. "You look," Victor began, words failing him for perhaps the first time in his adult life. He offered his arm instead, the gesture bridging the gulf between employer and employee. between criminal and innocent, between man and woman with unmistakable intent. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and the jewelry of the city's wealthiest residents. Conversations hushed momentarily as Victor entered with Amara, curious eyes assessing this unexpected development in the usually predictable life of the notorious crime lord. Franco Navarro watched from across the room, his smile not reaching his eyes as he noted the protective way Victor guided Amara through the crowd. "So the rumors are true," he murmured to his companion, raising his champagne glass in mock salute when Victor's gaze met his. The evening unfolded like a dream, as Amara was introduced to politicians who accepted Victor's campaign contributions, to business owners who laundered his money, to society matrons who overlooked his reputation in exchange for his generous donations to their pet causes. Through it all, Victor remained at her side, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back in a gesture both possessive and protective. To the observing crowd, his message was unmistakable. This woman was under his protection, part of his inner circle, untouchable by anyone who valued their continued existence. When the orchestra began playing, Victor led Amara to the dance floor with a grace that surprised her. "I didn't know you could dance," she whispered, as he guided her effortlessly through a waltz, their bodies moving in perfect harmony, despite never having danced together before. "There are many things you don't know about me," he replied, the usual harshness absent from his voice as they moved together under the glittering lights. For these precious moments, they could pretend they were simply a man and woman dancing, unburdened by the realities that awaited them outside this gilded ballroom. As the evening progressed, Amara noticed Franco Navarro's increasingly obvious interest in their every movement. "The man in the gray suit hasn't stopped watching us," she murmured to Victor during their third dance, her observation confirming his earlier suspicions. Victor drew her closer, his lips nearly touching her ear as he replied, "That's why you're here tonight. You see things others miss." The compliment warmed her, even as the implications chilled her blood, the beautiful fantasy of the evening giving way to the dangerous reality of Victor's world. As the gala reached its pinnacle, Victor was called away by his security chief for an urgent matter. "Stay within sight of my men," he instructed Amara, before reluctantly leaving her side, missing the predatory smile that crossed Franco Navarro's face as he approached her. "Ms. Rodriguez, I believe?" Franco's voice was honey over steel, as he extended his hand in greeting. Victor's newest interest. The pause before the last word carried insinuations that made Amara's skin crawl despite his outward politeness. Franco guided her to a quieter corner of the ballroom with a firm grip that masqueraded as gentlemanly escort. "Such a fascinating rise from maid to companion," he remarked, his eyes calculating as they assessed her worth as leverage against his rival. "I'm still a maid," Amara replied steadily, refusing to be intimidated despite recognizing the danger this man represented. "Mr. Castillo required staff presence tonight, nothing more." The lie fell easily from her lips, instinct telling her to minimize her importance. Franco's laugh held no humor as he leaned closer, invading her personal space with deliberate intimidation. "We both know that's not true, my dear. The question is whether you understand what happens to people who get too close to Victor Castillo." Before Amara could respond, a waiter approached offering champagne, momentarily interrupting Franco's quiet threats. She noticed something pass between the men, a nearly imperceptible nod that raised alarms in her mind as the waiter disappeared back into the crowd. Across the room, Victor concluded his business only to find Amara engaged in conversation with his most dangerous rival. His body tensed with immediate concern, especially when he noticed Franco's security detail blocking his direct path to them. What Victor couldn't see was Franco slipping a small listening device into Amara's clutch purse as he pretended to admire it. "A beautiful bag for a beautiful woman," he complimented smoothly, closing the clasp before returning it to her with a satisfied smile. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of tension, with Victor maintaining physical contact with Amara whenever possible, as if his touch could somehow protect her from Navarro's interest. The drive home was filled with heavy silence, both aware that something fundamental had changed. "He knows I'm important to you," Amara finally said, as the car approached the mansion, stating the dangerous truth they had both been avoiding. The vulnerability in Victor's eyes as he turned to her confirmed what neither had dared acknowledge before. The following morning brought chaos, as Victor discovered evidence of a major security breach within his organization. Information about shipment routes, safe house locations, and offshore accounts had been compromised, pointing to a devastating leak from someone with intimate knowledge of his operations. Gabriel presented the evidence with grim professionalism, hesitating before placing Amara's personnel file on Victor's desk alongside the timeline of information leaks. "The breaches started shortly after she began working in the main house," he stated, his loyalty to Victor forcing him to voice the unthinkable suspicion. Victor's first instinct was to reject the implication outright, but decades of survival in a world where trust meant death forced him to consider all possibilities. He ordered increased surveillance on all staff, while battling the sickening possibility that Amara had played him for a fool. Unaware of the storm gathering around her, Amara continued her duties while replaying the previous night in her mind. The dancing, Victor's protective presence, Franco's threatening interest. She failed to notice the subtle change in how security watched her movements through the house. The betrayal came from an unexpected direction when Lucia arrived at the mansion, escorted by security who had found her attempting to access the grounds through a service entrance. Her tearful confession revealed a devastating truth. She had been working for Navarro for months, feeding him information about the Castillo household. "She threatened my brother's family," Lucia confessed, her voice breaking as she revealed the depths of Navarro's manipulation. "He said it was just information about Victor's schedule at first. Nothing that would hurt anyone, but then he wanted to know about you specifically." The color drained from Amara's face as she realized the blind date with David had been no coincidence. It had been a calculated setup orchestrated by Franco to observe Victor's reaction to her humiliation. The restaurant choice, the timing, all designed to reveal a weakness in the untouchable crime lord. Victor paced the room with controlled fury, his mind racing through every interaction with Navarro over recent months, recalibrating past conversations with this new understanding. The calculated smiles, the casual inquiries about his household staff, all part of a meticulous plan to find his Achilles heel. Amara watched Victor transform before her eyes, his gentle demeanor replaced by the cold efficiency of a strategist preparing for war, and she realized with startling clarity that she loved both versions of this complex man who had changed her life with a simple act of kindness in a restaurant. "I never meant for you to get involved," Lucia sobbed, as she revealed how Franco had blackmailed her into placing Amara in the Castillo household as an unwitting spy. The listening device in her purse had been the final piece, meant to gather evidence to destroy Victor while framing Amara for the betrayal. Victor stood in the shadows of the room, his face an expressionless mask that concealed the rage and relief battling within him. His world had nearly collapsed based on a suspicion of Amara's betrayal, a pain far worse than any physical wound he had endured throughout his violent life. Amara's eyes met his across the room, hurt and understanding mingling in her gaze as she processed both his momentary doubt and his obvious relief at her innocence. The unspoken communication between them spoke volumes about how deeply intertwined their lives had become. Franco's plan became clear as they pieced together the evidence, using Amara as both an unwitting source of information and as Victor's weakness. The strategy was elegant in its cruelty, designed to destroy Victor professionally and personally in one devastating blow. "You need to leave the city," Victor stated once they were alone, his voice hollow with the knowledge of what needed to be done. "I'll provide money, new identity, protection, a complete disappearance until this is over." The words cost him dearly, each one a step toward losing her. Amara stood before him, no longer the invisible maid, but a woman who had seen both the monster and the man within him and chosen to stay. "And if I refuse to run?" she challenged, her quiet strength matching his determined protection in a battle of wills. The declaration of war came at dawn. 3 of Victor's lieutenants found dead, each with a green emerald placed on their chest in mocking reference to Amara's gala dress. The message was unmistakable. Franco Navarro was coming for everything Victor held dear. Victor transformed overnight into the ruthless strategist who had built his empire, gathering his captains and issuing orders with cold precision. The mansion became a fortress as he moved his operations to secure locations, preparing for a conflict that would reshape the city's criminal landscape. Amara refused to be shuttled away to safety, instead using her knowledge of nursing to establish a makeshift medical station in a secure wing of the mansion. "I won't abandon the people I care about," she told Victor with quiet determination, her hands steady as she organized supplies. The unexpected ally arrived 3 days into the conflict. Diego Suarez, once Victor's mentor and now retired from the life, appeared at the service entrance with 4 armed men. "You helped my grandson get out of the life last year," he explained to Victor. "Now I return the favor." Diego's arrival shifted the balance of power, bringing not just additional firepower, but invaluable intelligence about Franco's operations from connections still loyal to the old guard. His presence also brought wisdom when tensions ran high, his calm voice a counterpoint to Victor's rage. The war played out across the city in calculated moves and countermoves, businesses changing hands, territories contested, loyalties tested. Through it all, Victor found himself returning to the room where Amara waited, drawing strength from her unwavering presence amid the chaos. Late one night, as victory seemed within reach, Victor found Amara sleeping at her desk, exhausted from treating wounded men. He gently covered her with his jacket, allowing himself a rare moment of tenderness as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gesture awakened her, and in the vulnerable space between sleep and wakefulness, she reached for his hand. "Promise me something," she whispered, her voice heavy with unspoken emotion. "Promise me that when this is over, you'll find a way to become the man I know you can be." Victor's eyes reflected the conflict raging within him, the pull of power and the promise of redemption battling for dominance in his soul. "I can try to be better," he finally said, the words costing him more than any business negotiation ever had. "But I need you to understand that there will always be blood on these hands." Outside the makeshift medical station, Gabriel waited with news of Franco's latest move. 3 local businesses under Castillo protection had been bombed simultaneously, a clear escalation meant to force Victor into making a desperate mistake. The casualties included families, innocent bystanders who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Amara witnessed the transformation in Victor's eyes as he processed the information, a cold resolve settling over him like armor. "This ends tomorrow," he stated, his voice carrying the weight of inevitable violence, and for the first time since meeting him, Amara found herself afraid not for him, but of what he might become in his quest for vengeance. The night before the final confrontation, Victor found Amara in the garden, her hands tending to the roses that had somehow survived the chaos surrounding the estate. "If I don't return," he began, only to be silenced by her fingers against his lips, her eyes communicating what words could not, that some possibilities were too painful to acknowledge, even as they prepared for them. Victor knelt beside her, the fearsome mafia boss humbled by the impossible choice before him: continue as the monster who could protect her, or become the man worthy of her love. "Some sins can't be washed away," he replied, his voice rough with emotion rarely expressed. The final confrontation came not with gunfire, but with negotiation. Victor facing Franco across a table in neutral territory, both men flanked by their most trusted lieutenants. The city had tired of their war, with police pressure mounting and legitimate businesses suffering collateral damage. "You have something I want," Franco stated without preamble, his eyes cold as he placed a folder on the table between them. Inside were documents detailing Navarro's illegal operations, evidence that could destroy his empire if it reached the federal authorities. Victor's face betrayed nothing as he examined the material, documents he had believed secure in his private safe. "And what do you propose?" he asked, already suspecting the answer, even as his mind calculated potential strategies and outcomes. "Simple exchange, the evidence for the woman," Franco replied with a cruel smile, confirming Victor's worst fears. "She's become quite the liability for you, hasn't she? Quite the fall for the great Victor Castillo, undone by a cleaning lady." For the first time in his criminal career, Victor found himself considering options that once would have been unthinkable. The path forward crystallized with surprising clarity, not as a matter of strategy, but as a question of who he truly wanted to be. The meeting ended with an uneasy truce, both men returning to their territories to prepare for what would come next. Victor spent the night in his study, making calls and arranging transfers of assets, with the focused intensity of a man executing a long-planned escape. Dawn found him in the garden where Amara often spent quiet moments between her duties. She found him there, his usual impeccable appearance replaced by casual clothes and tired eyes that had seen too much darkness throughout his life. "I'm leaving the business," he announced without preamble, his decision made final by speaking it aloud. "I've arranged for Diego to take control, with conditions that will minimize the violence and move operations toward legitimate enterprises over time." Amara's expression shifted from surprise to cautious hope as she processed his words. "Why now?" she asked, needing to hear his motivation despite already knowing the answer in her heart. The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Victor reached for her hand, the gesture still unfamiliar but increasingly natural. "Because some things are worth more than power or money," he answered simply, the words inadequate for the transformation he had undergone since that night in the restaurant months ago. The decision had not come without sacrifice. Victor had surrendered control of legitimate businesses worth billions to secure their safety, leaving behind the empire he had spent decades building. Yet, as he watched sunlight play across Amara's face, he recognized it as the best trade he had ever negotiated. Their new life included unexpected challenges, nightmares that woke them both, moments when a car backfiring sent Victor reaching for a weapon that was no longer there, the learning curve of ordinary domesticity for two people who had lived extraordinary lives. Each day required conscious choice to move forward rather than backward. Amara found unexpected strength in Victor's vulnerability, in his willingness to start over, to learn to cook simple meals alongside her in their modest kitchen, to discuss literature rather than territory disputes. The man who had commanded an empire now found joy in small victories, mastering a piano piece, helping an elderly neighbor with yard work, earning genuine smiles from strangers. The most difficult adjustment came not from external threats, but from Victor's own restless mind, accustomed to constant vigilance and strategy. He channeled this energy into local business consulting, discovering that his tactical brilliance could transform struggling companies without a single threat or bribe, building something genuine for the first time in his life. His plan unfolded with the same precision that had made him a feared strategist. Key assets transferred to trusted associates, evidence against rivals placed in secure locations as insurance, arrangements made for his quiet disappearance from the life he had built through blood and intimidation. Franco's rage when he discovered Victor's maneuver was legendary, but the network of protection Victor had established around himself and Amara proved impenetrable. The old guard stood with Diego in maintaining the new order, forcing Franco to accept defeat or face destruction. The small coastal town welcomed them without questions, just another wealthy couple seeking privacy and peace away from city life. Victor purchased a modest house with a garden for Amara and piano for himself, symbols of the life they were building from the ashes of who they had been. Amara enrolled in the local nursing program, finally pursuing the dream that had been interrupted years before. Victor found unexpected purpose in consulting for legitimate businesses, his strategic mind valued in boardrooms rather than back alleys. Some nights, the shadows of his past would awaken him with nightmares of blood and betrayal. On those nights, Amara would hold him until the darkness receded, her presence a reminder that redemption was possible even for a man who had once ruled through fear. The small sapphire ring Victor presented to her on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon caught Amara by surprise. Not an extravagant diamond befitting a former crime lord, but a thoughtful choice that matched her eyes and the simplicity she had taught him to value above ostentation. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments which part of the world you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, as your support is important for me to continue creating content here.